Ladies and gentlemen, can I get your attention? Please work your way to your seats. We're about to get started. Hello and welcome to the Rotary Club of Fort Worth. It's Friday, you're in downtown Fort Worth, and there's only one thing going on, and that's right here. Thank you for being here. We also want to especially welcome former Congressman and gubernatorial candidate Beto O'Rourke and his team. Thank you very much for being here. We also want to thank our sponsor, Pastors for Texas Children. Pastors and faith leaders of all denominations are joining Pastors for Texas Children to support the quality education of all Texas children. PTC's purpose is to spark a strong grassroots movement committed to standing up for our children, families, and Texas communities. Thank you, Charlie. We also want to particularly thank our visiting Rotarians and guests. They are numerous today, so rather than do our traditional individual introduction, we definitely want to thank all of you for being here. In addition, we have a few particular dignitaries. I want to point out Texas State Senator Beverly Powell, Fort Worth City Councilman Carlos Flores, and Dr. Jared Williams, former Fort Worth City Councilman Joel Burns is also here. We have numerous other important citizens. I hope I have not inadvertently overlooked one of our elected officials, but welcome to all of you. Former Mayor Barr, one of our Rotarians. We certainly don't take him for granted, but he's one of us. And former Mayor of Burleson, Ken Shetter. And now, if I could please have Justin McLaughlin, who is the founder of Xenia Roastery, lead the invocation, and past President Doug Briley will lead us in the national anthem. He, of course, is President and CEO of Warren Douglas Advertising.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Would everybody join me by bowing your heads, please? Almighty God, we ask for your guidance and wisdom to lead Rotary International to the places and causes you desire. We are devoted to service above self. Accordingly, may each of us be inspired to respond to opportunities to serve our fellow man. Direct us in love as we meet in Rotary Fellowship. Open our hearts to the power of peace and understanding. Implore our spirits not to see ourselves as alone, but united with fellow Rotarians in many parts of the world. We pray that global efforts for goodwill towards mankind will encourage us to take up works which honor and benefit those in need. Heavenly Father, we invoke a blessing upon this occasion of Rotary Fellowship. Make us acutely aware of the deeper significance of our meeting as we develop our friendships in respect to Rotary service that radiates from Fort Worth to a wider community abroad. Let us not forget to acknowledge the provisions you so graciously give us. Thankfully, we receive them. Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please be seated and start to enjoy your lunch. And thank you again for joining us here today. Here at Rotary, we convene important discussions with high-profile speakers each and every week. In addition to our service above self approach to addressing community needs, our club is known as a premier forum for respectful public discourse on a variety of relevant, worthwhile topics, some of which may be sensitive or even difficult. Our club constitution provides clear guidance so far as the importance of what we call fair and intelligent study on issues that pertain to the general welfare of the community, the nation, and the world. Very occasionally, this includes hearing from candidates for public office. But what we should also note is the very clear and intentional apolitical stance of Rotary and Rotary International. We seek to bring forth intelligent discussion that illuminates and helps our members form their own individual opinions. Yet we particularly avoid the endorsement of any candidate or discussion of the candidate's merits or lack thereof, nor do we take positions on policies or affairs of a political nature, both home and abroad. Rather, as Rotarians, we focus to serve on those in need and aim to be a force for peace and humanity. Another core tenet of Rotary is, of course, the four-way test. Each week we recite the four-way test, and throughout the world, this statement is used by Rotarians and others as a moral code for personal and business relationships. I learned on the way in that candidate O'Rourke is also a former Rotarian of the downtown El Paso Club. So I'm sure he's very familiar with the four-way test. So please join us as we recite it now. Number 1, is it the truth? 2, is it fair to all concerned? 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Finally, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And it is with this spirit that we now proceed with the program at hand. I would like to introduce our chairman for the day, past President Jim Whitten, who is also director shareholder with Brackett & Ellis, PC.
I'm not used to getting that kind of a round of applause. It's usually kind of sporadic. Beto O'Rourke is a fourth-generation Texan, born and raised in El Paso, where he has served as a small business owner, a city council member, and a member of the United States House of Representatives. He founded and currently leads Powered by People, a Texas-based organization to register voters and expand voting rights. Since 2019, it has registered over 250,000 additional Texans. The Rotary Club of Fort Worth has a long tradition of inviting candidates from high-profile races. We leave it to each candidate whether or not to accept the invitation. If one candidate declines, the invitation remains open to the candidate who accepts. We have invited Governor Abbott. We're still waiting to hear from him. We hope he replies. We hope he comes. But it's another long-standing tradition that we don't allow any candidate to speak less than 30 days before the election. Now, we are in for an interesting discussion today, and helping us is J.R. Laddie. As you can tell, most everyone in the room knows J.R., and they know she is enlightening, entertaining, sometimes intimidating. I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, Beto and his wife Amy have 3 children, Ulysses, Molly, and Henry, back in El Paso. I mentioned that today because I have a new grandchild this week, so I just thought, I've got pictures if you want to. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Beto O'Rourke and J.R. Laddie, and let's have some discussion.
It's one step and you're up there.
All right. Well, Beto has agreed to give a few comments first before we begin with the questioning, so over to you.
I just want to begin by thanking each of you for welcoming me to join you today and to have the chance not only to introduce myself, but to hopefully take your questions and hear your ideas, your concerns the opportunities that you see here in the community. I want to thank Jim for getting us kicked off, President Snell for extending the invitation, and JR for the conversation that we're about to have. And I want to thank all of you for the work that you do here in this community and the way in which you do it. As a former Rotarian and just reciting this four-way test again, it's notable to me that there is not a number 5 that asks, are you a Republican or a Democrat, or a 6, to whom do you pray, or number 7, how do you love? We're not defined by our differences. We're defined by what we can do together. I was reminded of that. I was told JR and President Snell that this morning I woke up, ran down from my hotel to the Trinity River and ran right past that Rotary park that's got that sculpture, and I learned it was established, I think, in the first part of the 20th century. It's more than 100 years old. You all and your predecessors built that together, and this is a time, if ever there was one, where we got to find out where the common ground is and decide that we're going to come together regardless of the differences. Just briefly to extend the bio that Jim just read to you, 4th generation Texan, born and raised in El Paso, started a small business there in 1998, building websites, designing business-to-business online software. Know what it's like to meet a payroll every single week, to get financing from the bank, to hustle, to develop new clients, and to deliver for the ones that you have. I know what it's like to serve on the city council, where I was there for 6 years, not as a Republican or as a Democrat, but as an El Pasoan who wanted to make sure that our community could get ahead. As Jim said, I served in the United States House of Representatives on the House Armed Services Committee and the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Really the last 2 bastions of bipartisanship in that very divided institution. No one asks whether the veteran is a Republican or a Democrat. We just want to make sure that she can get access to those benefits, to that help, to that care that she's earned, that she deserves, that we owe her, thanks to her service and her willingness to put her life on the line. I worked in a Republican majority institution and was able to deliver for veterans by reaching out and listening to and working with Republicans to get the job done, by getting that legislation signed into law by the one man on the planet with whom I agree on almost nothing, Donald J. Trump. And yet we could find enough common ground there to do better for those who had served us. This campaign that we're running today is run in that same spirit. The service I want to provide as governor by that same way of making sure that we find the common ground, bring us together, and do the big things. Whether, as Pastor Johnson would remind us, that means saving our public schools, one of the last reliable redoubts of democracy in this country, where we come together regardless of our differences, or ensuring that we attract better jobs, higher skill, higher value, higher wage for the young people who are graduating from these schools right here in Fort Worth, or common sense bipartisan things like expanding Medicaid so that everyone can be able to see a doctor and be healthy enough and well enough to live to their full potential. These are the big ideas that we want to bring Texas around together. So looking forward to answering your questions. Feel privileged to be able to have your attention here today. And JR, looking forward to being able to have this conversation with you. Thank you all for having me out. Appreciate it.
So I go, check, check, check. He's talked about that type of stuff. But you have had a very eventful week in North Central Texas. And we'll get this out of the way right at the top of the show here, folks. This venue has twice in recent years heard the beautiful words that you shared in your moment of unrestrained anger on Wednesday. And the first time it was said by somebody affiliated with the Medal of Honor Museum in Arlington. And the second time it was said with someone affiliated with the Pro Bull Riders Association. So I imagine that some of the people who are here today are hoping for a repeat, just like NASCAR fans want to see a crash, right? You are hoping for it. But I have full faith that this audience of business professionals and their guests will be respectful and polite, despite what some of you are saying in your heads. So keep it there, please. Thank you very much. I would say, looking at this room, that there are many people here who have never known a Texas with a Democrat in a statewide office. 1994 was the last time we had Democrats voting in a statewide office. If not for about 4+% of the rural vote the last time you ran for statewide office, I would be calling you senator, and we all probably wouldn't be here today. So what were your takeaways from your race against Ted Cruz, and what are you doing in this election to sweeten your chances of a different outcome?
We are learning from what we did well in 2018. We went to every one of the 254 counties. We wrote nobody off. We took no one for granted. We helped to produce the largest voter turnout in a Texas midterm election since 1970. We went to where young people are particularly and saw young voter turnout up 504% from the prior midterm, became the first Democrat to win Tarrant County since the year 1994 by the skin of our teeth, but we still won it. And though we were only 2.5 points down from Ted Cruz, we picked up 12 state house seats. We picked up 2 congressional seats, including Colin Allred up here in North Texas, which flipped control of the House of Representatives. 17 African-American women won judicial elections in Harris County. It was really transformative for the state of Texas. And for anyone who thought that it may have been an anomaly, in 2020, we didn't lose any of those seats. Democrats didn't pick up seats, that's true, but that firewall that we built up stood, and now we're building on that base. What I have learned, and you mentioned rural Texas in particular, is you've got to show up for people if you're going to be able to earn their votes. So to go to Clarksville, for example, small community in East Texas, you may or may not have been there before, but you should know that they're one of the 16 communities whose hospital has closed down in rural Texas over the last 7 years. So folks now have to drive hundreds of miles, in some cases for some specialties, to be able to see a provider. Harder to attract or retain young people in that community. Hard to deepen your tax base, so now those who are left are paying more in property taxes in order to get by. When the Universal Service Fund that subsidizes your rural telephone and internet bills has been vetoed by the governor, your cost of living and doing business in that community continues to climb. Showing up in Clarksville shows them that I understand their issues, their problems. I listen, I learn, and I commit myself to fighting for them. Expanding Medicaid, for example, to reopen that shuttered hospital, extending rural broadband access so that folks can get online and sell what they grow onto a market that is truly global and depends on a high-speed connection to be able to get the job done. These are communities that I'll tell you my party has written off in the past, and where Democrats have feared to tread, Republicans don't have to show up for either. So there's no contest in November. There is no contest of ideas. There's no candidate being held accountable as you will do for me here today. And those folks functionally go unrepresented. So getting back into these communities, fighting for them. And then last thing, not making this about Democrats and not making this about Republicans. Mayor Shetter of Burleson understands this. This race is less like a congressional race or a Senate race. How many of our fellows do we have up on the board versus how many of theirs? And it's more like a mayor's race. Do you understand my community? Do you know that we exist? Are you going to be able to deliver for us once you are in office? Because when Ken was elected mayor of Burleson, he served everyone, regardless of whether or not they voted for him. That's the same philosophy that I bring to this race. I think that approach of making sure that everyone is invited, regardless of our differences, and that we bring us together in this very polarized moment to do the big things, public ed, great jobs, making sure that you can see a doctor. That's how we win this race and get over the hump.
Thank you. You referenced public ed, and I'm going to stick with the rural voters for a moment. Let's talk a little bit about school vouchers and the privatization of public education in our state. So your party does back charter schools, which costs taxpayers about $3 billion annually. The state Republican Party wants a voucher program, and Governor Abbott is the first governor to fully sign on to the idea of having vouchers in Texas. Rural Republicans historically have been not in favor of the idea of using public dollars in private schools. We have faith-based schools, particularly within the Catholic diocese, that have traditionally been in the work of educating children, and so they are in favor of the voucher idea as well. But the reality is 90% of Texas school children today are going to school in traditional public education places. How would you as governor traverse this privatization minefield of fiscal, religious, and cultural issues for the best of our Texas kids?
We're going to do this by listening to and working with everyone, parents, taxpayers into these independent school districts, the educators, the counselors, the librarians, the kids who go to these schools, who at the end of the day are the people that we're doing this for in the first place. And what I hear when I listen to them is that they want us to do better when it comes to public education. Because right now, despite the best efforts of present company, we are doing an incredibly poor job. You compare Texas public ed and our outcomes to California or Florida or North Carolina or Virginia or Illinois or New York or any one of our peer states. As they climb, we descend. In the average fourth grade classroom, 7 out of 10 kids cannot read at grade level in the state of Texas. Now, you know that their prospects in 5th grade and 6th grade of graduating on time, of being able to seek and obtain post-secondary education, of working a living wage job diminish with their inability to be able to read. And you don't fix that in the 4th grade or in the 5th grade. You don't even fix that in the 3rd grade. You got to make sure that we make investments all the way through their lifetime. So when you have half of Texas school teachers working a 2nd or a 3rd job in order to make ends meet, because on average we underpay them by $7,500 a year. The school teacher here in Fort Worth is making $5,000 less today than when Greg Abbott was first elected more than 7 years ago when you adjust for inflation. Retired school teachers haven't seen a cost of living adjustment since the year of our Lord 2004. And our pupils are underfunded by $4,000 against the national average. Listen, I'm the first to acknowledge that money will not fix everything. But when you have disinvested to this level, and now you're threatening to take more money out of our schools through vouchers and send them to private schools, it is a recipe for disaster for our state. So I propose that we fully invest in these public schools. Make sure that we hold our trustees, our principals, our teachers, our parents, our students fully accountable for the outcomes that we seek, that they deserve, and that we all want, so that we can do better as a state, that we stop this effort to take money out of those classrooms. Because when you go to these rural communities that JR and I were just talking about, we take public tax dollars out of those classrooms. There is not a private school very often in most of these rural counties for that money to go into. It'll get shifted off into Fort Worth or Dallas or Austin or Houston or somewhere else, which brings me to this story of being in Henrietta, Texas, and going into Stewart's Sweet Shop, which rumor was had the best sweet roll of any community in Texas. And I went in and they do. And woman noticed me because I'd been in Wichita Falls the night before, saw me on the Wichita Falls news and said, "Hey, come on over here." She said, "My husband, my kids and I, we're all Republicans, probably not going to vote for you, but we want to know what you're all about." And, I said, "I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you, and I want to know what's on your mind." And she said, "I am a public school educator," this woman said to me. And she said, "If you dare take my tax dollars out of my classroom, away from my kids, and send them to some private school," she said, "Beto O'Rourke, I will hunt you down. I will find you and I will get you and I will hold you accountable." This matters to all of us, no matter where we are in the state of Texas. I argue it is one of the most unifying issues that we can possibly find, and it is the best long-term investment in our prosperity and our opportunity here in the state of Texas. So that's why I begin with that in this campaign. Thanks for asking.
So I asked a version of this next question to Tarrant County Judge Gwen Whitley when he was here recently and visited the club. There is no arguing that economic development in our state is going gangbusters. The Lone Star State ranks in the top 10 of the best states to do business in, and we are proud here in Tarrant County to have the kind of vibrant economy that we have. But what impact do you think the repeal of Roe v. Wade and our state's response, basically prohibiting women from being able to make decisions on their own health care, what impact will that have on future relocations to our state?
I begin by acknowledging that the economic success that we enjoy as a state has nothing to do with a political party or a position of power. So Democrats, Republicans alike really didn't have a whole bunch to do with it. You all did. The folks who took the risks, who created the jobs, who worked so hard day in and day out have produced this economic miracle right here in the state of Texas, independent of partisanship or anything else. And that's being jeopardized right now at this moment by the extremism that we see of those who are in power. So they may not have built it, but they could very well single-handedly destroy it if we do not get back on the right track. What am I talking about? If you have a governor who says that if you're raising a transgender child, I'm going to pursue you for child abuse and take that kid from your custody and turn him over to CPS, the worst run foster care program in America. If you have legislators proposing a don't say gay bill in the next legislative session, or literally banning books in the world's greatest democracy, in the greatest state within it right now, happening in our school libraries today. But worst of all is 49 years after 3 Texas women, Jane Roe, Linda Coffey, who still lives in Dallas, Texas, her attorney, her other attorney, Sarah Weddington from Abilene, won protection for the right to privacy, to make personal, very often painful decisions on your own, without government intervention in your life, that it is under greater attack here than anywhere else. Not only do we have a total ban on abortion, with no exception for rape or incest, not only do we have one of the highest maternal mortality rates because of that, because when you've foreclosed options to go to a family planning clinic, you've also stopped people from getting a cervical cancer screening or seeing a family planning provider or seeing a doctor of any kind in the least insured state in America. They're now saying that they're coming after you as employers. House Freedom Caucus, on their letterhead, wrote to one of North Texas's largest law firms and said, if you dare pay for the out-of-state travel of any woman who works for you to make her own personal health care decisions, we will be coming after you. Others are talking about checking your travel documents if you're of childbearing age and you're a woman in Texas who seeks to leave the state going forward. You try recruiting someone into this state when their bodily autonomy is under attack like this, when you see this level of fringe extremism found almost nowhere else in America today. We just met a woman in Cleburne, Texas, at a wonderful town hall meeting that we held, who said that she and her husband were having a child, so excited, picked the name out. This was the child of their choice. Their doctor said that child was no longer viable, and that the best medical advice was to terminate that pregnancy, but that they could not do that in the state of Texas until her life was literally on the line. She had to be dying before they would do anything about it. So at her own expense, she traveled to another state to have this procedure performed. How do we keep her here in this state under conditions like these? So very long answer to your question, but yes, we imperil our success that we have today, our future success tomorrow, if we do not treat everyone equally under the law and protect these rights that have been won and fought for by Texas women before. That's why this issue of reproductive health care freedom is on the ballot this November.
So you made reference to insurance in this state. The 2022 State of Mental Health in America report says that Texas ranks 51st, because they do the states plus the District of Columbia, in access to mental health care. 2/3 of Texas counties don't have a single psychiatrist in them. And 1 in 5 Texans don't have health insurance, while the Lone Star State is one of only a dozen that has not expanded Medicaid. You referenced that before, but as governor, if you are elected, how do you address these challenges to take care of both the physical and the mental health of all of our Texans?
We were at another town hall in Lufkin, Texas. And just as we're doing today, I made a very brief presentation. Then we have a second microphone. Anyone can ask any question, tell any story. And this young woman stood up and she said, Beto, I want you to know that my brother gets arrested on purpose to be taken to the county jail, to have his schizophrenia treated in the only place that there is any guarantee of treatment. He earns too much to qualify for Texas's Medicaid, but doesn't earn enough to be able to afford private insurance or subsidies for Obamacare. And so he goes to the county jail at a cost to the Lufkin taxpayer of $120 a night for a few days, and then he's back out on the streets. This, unfortunately, is the rule and not the exception. Largest provider of mental health care services in this state, a state that has a $2 trillion GDP, 9th largest on planet Earth, $250 billion biannual budget. Largest mental health care provider is the county jail system. Largest mental health care inpatient facility in the state of Texas is the Harris County Jail in downtown Houston. Question is, what are we going to do about this to fix it? If we took yes for an answer on Medicaid expansion, we would bring back $10 billion of our federal income taxes. This is Texas money that's in Washington, D.C. right now that could flow right back to this state to hire more providers, including psychiatrists in these counties that have not a single one, to stand up more behavioral health centers across the state, to connect young men like that person in Lufkin, Texas, with the kind of help at a fraction of the cost of paying $120 a night that allows him to be well enough to raise his family, work that job, start a small business, join the Rotary Club, finish his education, whatever he was placed on this planet to do in the first place. We want him healthy enough and well enough to do it. And lest you think that this is some modern democratic scheme to take over medicine in Texas, Texas came up with Medicaid in 1965. It was signed into law that summer by the first Texas president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who said, look, no one should be so unfortunate, so unlucky, so poor that they can't get that health care that literally keeps them alive and contributing back to the rest of us. And all 4 of our border states, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, 3 with Republican governors and Republican legislatures, have taken the deal on the table. And the kicker is, when we take that $10 billion annually that comes into the state of Texas, again, of our money coming back to us, not only do we connect more people with care, stand up some of those closed 16 rural hospitals in Texas, but we will lower your property tax bill. Because when we don't expand Medicaid, that person takes themselves to the county jail, or that untreated diabetic takes themselves to your county hospital, and you, the county taxpayer, pick up the bill at the end of the day for paying for uncompensated indigent care. Expanding Medicaid reduces your property taxes in the bargain. So it's the right thing for us to do.
At last month's, I'm going way different direction now. At last month's Aspen Security Forum, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said, our nation's southern border, quote, is secure. Governor Abbott has doubled down on his promise to finish the wall, and during your presidential campaign, you said that you would dismantle the wall if elected. Do you agree with Secretary Mayorkas? Do you still think that we have no need of a physical barrier to keep drug smugglers, human traffickers, or illegal immigration out of the country?
Here's what I think we need. We do have a real challenge at our southern border. We do have chaos right now, confusion in these small communities like Eagle Pass and Del Rio, where people are coming through by the thousands, by the tens of thousands. The vast majority coming to seek work, to join family, to flee persecution in their home country and seek refuge in ours. But today there is not a legal orderly, safe path for them to be able to do that. In fact, as you know, Ronald Reagan was the last administration that presided over a reform of our immigration system. It has been that long since our laws have changed. And imagine everything that's happened in this country in the last 40 years, certainly at our border with Mexico here in Texas. So instead of stunts like busing migrants to New York or Washington, D.C. at Texas taxpayer expense, or building a few more miles of wall, which will do nothing to keep out the level of misery facing so many of our fellow human beings on this continent. Instead of involuntarily activating 10,000 members of the National Guard in the state of Texas and deploying them to the border, where 8 of them have lost their lives so far. 4 have taken their own lives. 4 have died under questionable circumstances. None of them have been killed by a migrant or anybody coming over the border from Mexico. We need solutions. Here's what I've heard by listening to our fellow Texans. Not Mayorkas, not anybody from outside of Texas, but Republicans and Democrats in this state. 1, we need a Texas-based guest worker program. When I go to the Cotton Gin in Roscoe, the manager there says there's 46 jobs in this gin. I cannot find a soul born in Roscoe or nearby Sweetwater or anywhere in Texas who will work a single one of them. Immigrants come here for the privilege of being able to do this so that we have some thread on our back right now. Same thing in the slaughterhouse in the Panhandle, same thing in La Mesa at a cotton growing operation there. It's the low wage jobs, it's the high-end, high technology jobs. Immigrants are coming here and making us better by their very presence, but we have a disorderly, chaotic system right now, and we got to get it fixed. Let's make sure that Republicans and Democrats rewrite that on Texas terms. Second, if you're waiting to join family from Mexico, the back of the line extends 20 years today. I do not condone, nor does it justify anybody jumping that line, but I understand why someone would do that. Lift the per country cap so that folks aren't waiting 20 years to do the right thing. And then lastly, if you're seeking asylum, if you got into that trailer that ended up in San Antonio, Texas, imagine what's going through your mind when you step into it. You don't jump into that trailer to take someone else's job or steal their benefits or come cause harm in this country. You do it probably because you have no other option. Imagine now lifting up your 11-year-old son to join you in the back of that trailer, crossing the border right now. You only do it if this is the only way to save that kid's life. It's the only way I'd put my 11-year-old son, Henry, in the back of a trailer today. Asylum seekers are waiting 6 years for their claims to be adjudicated right now in this country. Let's hire up the adjudicators, the attorneys, the judges to make sure that we can resolve this in 6 weeks. And listen, if you pass the bar, you pass that test, welcome to America. We're glad you're here in a country of asylum seekers and refugees. If you don't, sometimes my Democratic colleagues don't like to hear this, you're going back to your home country, no question about it. If you want to come here, you will follow our laws. We do that. We take care of those who come to work, those who come to join family, those who come to seek asylum, move them off the table. The only people who are left are those who seek to do us harm, who want to traffic fentanyl, for example, into this country, or traffic in human beings. Today, they're needles in a haystack. We're lucky if we find them. Move that haystack out of the way, and we will be able to stop them. That is a solution, not a stunt. That'll make us far more secure, far safer, and allow us to live up to our values as a state comprised of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees from the world over.
So Texas is one of only 10 states in our nation that has no limitations on donations to political campaigns. And CNN's recent Deep in the Pockets of Texas report shined a light on the influence of a handful of billionaires who steer politics from school boards and city councils to the state legislature. If elected, how would you address the issue through campaign finance reform if you believe that's necessary?
I believe it's very necessary for the integrity of our democracy, for your ability to be able to rely on the fact that the people you've placed in positions of public trust are more focused on you than they are in any special interest or any donor. Even the appearance of a conflict of interest breeds cynicism and distrust and lack of participation in our government. And that weakens our democracy, it weakens our community. And at a time that democracy is under attack, unlike any other time in our lifetimes, maybe arguably any time since the Civil War, it's time that we shore it up. And again, not for Democrats and not for Republicans. Having campaign contribution limits is a great place to start. Having greater transparency in who's donating to these campaigns so that we understand who has access, or at least the appearance of access and influence, that will go a long way. But that would not be the right place to stop. I want to make sure that we also have term limits. I happen to believe that there's nothing special about me or anyone else that should allow us to functionally be able to serve term after term unchecked due to the power of incumbency. What if we said, you serve a number of terms, we could only serve 3 terms in the El Paso City Council, then you get the heck out of the way and allow someone else to bring their unique experience, expertise, and perspective to bear. What if we no longer allowed politicians? Democrats do this and Republicans do this when they're in power, okay? One party does not have a monopoly on this, on gerrymandering. What if we said, you don't get to pick your voters any longer? The voters, through nonpartisan public redistricting commissions, are going to decide the boundaries of these districts. I know enough about the amazing work that Senator Powell has done for North Texas and this community to know that if she had not been gerrymandered out of the district that she represented, that she could stand for re-election. And who knows if she would win or not, but that's a contest that we want to have, a contest of ideas, of track record, of commitments and vision. But right now, our future is foreclosed by having those in power choose who can actually vote in these elections. What if we had automatic and same-day voter registration in the state of Texas? This is the toughest in the nation in which to vote and in which to get registered to vote. And just to make a last final point about how urgent the need is to shore up this democracy. Not only is it harder to vote in Texas than in any other, but last March of this year, 13% of the mail-in ballots cast were rejected by the state of Texas. The previous high water mark had been 1%. If we were to watch the news tonight and the anchor said Venezuela held elections today and 13% of the ballots were rejected, we'd say that checks out. They're not a real democracy. They're not like us here in the US and in the state of Texas. 95-year-old veteran had his request to vote by mail rejected not once, but 3 times. And if anyone has earned the right to vote in this state, it's that guy willing to lose his life to fight fascism half a world away in 1944 to defend democracy here at home. Whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, no me importa. It does not matter to me. I just want to make sure that you can freely and fairly cast that ballot, have your voice heard, and determine the outcome of these next elections, and that this democracy, which has withstood the test of time for 246 years and counting, does not perish from this earth, because as Lincoln said, it's the last best hope. And here in Texas, we can decide the outcome of that as well in this election. Thanks for asking.
You're welcome. So in a semi-related question, billionaire George Soros just gave you $1 million for your campaign. And in California, that money helped elect 2 DAs, district attorneys, who are now being characterized as soft on crime. So what will Soros's ROI be if you get elected governor?
That donation was one of 500,000 unique donations that we received over the last 4 months. We raised $27 million total in that period, 3 million more than the sitting governor of the state of Texas. The largest single group of contributors was school teachers right here in the state of Texas. And everyone who donates to us, whether you gave $1 million, whether you gave $5, gets the same thing. They get good government and someone who's focused on the priorities that I just mentioned earlier. Great public schools, the kind of jobs that we want in our communities, and being able to do bipartisan things that we can all agree on, like expanding access to healthcare through Medicaid. So I want to make sure, because you mentioned crime, that we have just a moment to talk about that. Violent crime in this state is soaring. The ability to bring perpetrators to justice is declining. The governor, who upon signing a bill that outlaws abortion, when asked by a reporter if he understood that there was no exception for rape, said he would eliminate rape in the state of Texas. More rapes have been committed in this state than any other in the union. The ability to bring rapists to justice has declined by half on his watch. There are thousands of untested rape kits at DPS headquarters in Austin, Texas right now. And I know we'll probably get to guns at some point in this conversation, but let me just briefly say this. You know that we've had for years a program called License to Carry, which I really think was the pride of this country when it comes to responsible gun ownership. You want to carry a gun in public? We have no problem with that, the License to Carry program said. Just make sure that you go through a background check. You have some firearms training so that we are sure that you have some proficiency in this weapon, and that we vet you to determine whether you're a threat to anybody in our community. Over the last 5 years, law enforcement 38,000 times deemed somebody too unsafe to have a license to carry a firearm in public. They were a danger to themselves, they were a danger to their spouse, they were a danger to someone else. Law enforcement begged Governor Abbott not to sign permitless carry that does away with the LTC program into law, turned his back on them, did it all the same. Now, all 38,000 of those who had those licenses denied are free to carry on our streets. We're none the wiser or safer for it, as can tens of thousands who never applied for a license because they knew they would never pass the background check. More cops have been gunned down in Texas than in any other state, and we've seen a predictable spike in gun violence in Texas. So we will be very hard on crime, especially violent crime, and prioritize the safety and security of our fellow Texans, especially those kids entering the classroom this fall, above any other special interest, any other lobby, whether it's the NRA or anybody else. I can think of nothing more important.
So full disclosure here, I am married to a police officer who was worked SWAT and undercover narcotics and gang unit, all the nasty boy assignments. What is your assessment on the state of policing beyond what you just said, but also the reality that major police departments throughout this state and frankly the nation are begging for officers because they cannot get enough? And there are some people who are construing some of your comments that you made in reference to the city of Minneapolis, that you said the path that they took to sort of remove an over-militarized police department and to rebuild some of the units and to defund some of the units. The quote has been taken out of context in some places, but what is your assessment of policing in Texas, and how do we make sure that we have men and women like Kirk Driver sitting right there, willing to put themselves in harm's way for us?
It's arguably one of, if not the most important jobs in our community. I mentioned number one priority for the governor, for the state senator, for anyone in a position of public trust is to keep the people that you serve safe and secure. And so that means having the backs of members of law enforcement, police officers, sheriff's deputies, anyone who wears that badge. And we're just not getting the job done in Texas today. I mean, part of the reason that I have town hall meetings like this all over the state is so that I can understand how we can do a better job. A few weeks ago, I was in Muleshoe, Texas, that hotbed of liberal activism that you all know about in the western part of the Panhandle. And we were talking about public education and this attack on teachers and vouchers. And afterwards, a police officer who was at the event came up to me and he said, "Beto, I love what you're saying about teacher pay and teacher retirement. My wife's a teacher. My mom is a retired teacher. Thank you for that." He said, "I'm struggling right now on the salary that I make here in Muleshoe. And to your point, very hard for us to attract more officers to the force. What are you going to do about that?" We need to prioritize funding for these departments. We need to make sure that there are cost of living adjustments for these officers who have such a hard job. I mentioned active duty service members and veterans putting their lives on the line. These officers do it each and every single day, and they keep our communities safe as a result. So let's make sure that we have their back. Let's add to that additional training to make sure that through no fault of their own, we do not have officers who are unwittingly bringing bias into the profession and treating some people differently based on the color of their skin or their country of national origin. We may not like to acknowledge it or talk about it, but it is happening day in and day out across the state of Texas. And investment in the training and getting behind these great officers will improve that. And then last thing, let's make sure that we're holding everyone in these positions to the highest level of accountability. The vast majority are doing an extraordinary job under tremendous pressure and trying conditions. A very small minority abuse that position of public trust and power. And when they do, they must be held accountable to the full consequence of the law, because if we fail to do that, that will breed distrust between our community or certain communities and law enforcement, and that imperils the safety and security of our communities. I know that incoming President Driver could attest that when a community has a trusting relationship with law enforcement, they're more eager to report suspicious activity, to serve as witnesses in trials, to bring perpetrators to justice, to keep our communities more safe. So I want to make sure that we have the closest possible working relationship with law enforcement. And as I mentioned earlier, listen to their advice and guidance on issues like gun violence in our communities, restore that license to carry program, and keep our communities far safer than they are today.
So one last question for me before we open it up to the floor. So my husband, and I may have forgotten to mention this, but he's a federally licensed firearms dealer and a shooting instructor. Well, he and I own firearms, including AR-15s, which have only been used to shoot holes in targets in the gun range in our backyard. Call before you come see us. So throughout your various campaigns for office, you said, as recently as Wednesday, in between expletives, that we have to make common sense gun safety reforms and find common ground. So what does that look like for law-abiding gun owners like me and my husband when we hear that you think there is a certain class of firearm because of what it looks like should be removed from our home?
Thanks for this question. I could really care less what the firearm looks like. It's what that firearm can do. AR-15 was originally engineered and designed and sold to the United States military because that high impact, high velocity round, when it hits an enemy soldier, even at 500 feet through that helmet, can take him down dead. That's what it's supposed to do. When you listen to the physicians who met the bodies of those kids in Uvalde after they were shot by that very same weapon, they told us that they could only identify them by the shoes that they were wearing. It liquefies what is inside, the soft tissue,
the ammo that did that, not the firearm.
Well, allow me to finish, and then I'd be very happy to.
And the Democrats turned on her right then.
No. We talked about common ground, and I seek it, and I hope to give you an example of it, and even see if you and I can find some agreement on this issue. I mention all of that because your mayor here, who may or may not have been a Republican, I don't know, I think it's an independent, nonpartisan position, has argued that at a minimum we should raise the age of purchase from 18 to 21. That shooter in Uvalde, and there will be an argument from some, and I think there's some merit to it, okay? I want to acknowledge this, that criminals will not follow the law. Beto, you can raise the age, but if you're intent on doing harm, you're going to find a way around it. Some people will, but this young man in Uvalde patiently waited for his 18th birthday. Didn't try to get the AR at 16, didn't try to get it at 17, turned 18 literally on his birthday, goes into that gun store, buys not one, but 2 of these AR-15s and hundreds of rounds of this ammunition that you and I were just talking about. Raise the age to 21, and in that instance, at least, we would have purchased 3 more years for some kind of intervention or change in that young man's life. Add to that a red flag law that simply says, if you're the owner of that AR-15 and you are talking about using it against other people, we're going to intervene before it's too late. You all have read the reports that this troubled young man was sending signals off with such clarity that his friends called him the school shooter before he ever walked into a school and shot anybody. Red flag law allows us to retrieve that firearm after due process from that home before it is used against anybody else and return to its owner once all legitimate concerns have been addressed. How about a universal background check? A federal firearms dealer has to administer them to anybody who purchases from her or from him. But because we don't have universal in Texas, a private seller can sell you that weapon, no questions asked, and it's perfectly legal in the state. That's how you end up with 8 people dead in Midland, Odessa in 2019. Didn't pass a background check at the gun store, went to a private seller, bought that same AR-15, used it against people in that community. 5 of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history have taken place in this state in the last 5 years. You either accept that that's just who we are, we're violent, we're murderous, we like to shoot each other up in our churches, in our Walmarts, in our schools, or that there is something that we can do to both protect the Second Amendment and also better protect the lives of those in our lives, especially students who are entering the school. And now on this point about AR-15s, I think you and I would agree, and maybe everyone in the room, that the Second Amendment, just like any other constitutionally protected right, is not unlimited. First Amendment allows freedom of speech, but famously we know the example, you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater if there's not a fire because people might trample one another and kill each other in the process. That's not protected. Second Amendment, in 1934, this country was sick and tired of seeing people shot up with automatic machine guns. And though we didn't ban them or prohibit their ownership, we made it so onerous to do so that I challenge you to tell me the last time there was a mass shooting in this country involving a fully automatic machine gun in America. We just decided in 1934 that there was this line, and a fully automatic machine gun was on one side of this line, and there were other types of firearms on the other side. The argument that I'm making today is that that AR-15, AK-47 is on the other side of that line. However, I respect those who feel differently, and that's the genius of our democracy, is that we can peacefully, non-violently disagree about things that we passionately care about, and then look for consensus and common ground. And that's what I'm trying to do with my recommendation, that we raise that age to 21, that we have a universal background check, and that we implement red flag laws. As I've listened to gun owners and non-gun owners alike, Republicans and Democrats, that's where we seem to have some consensus. That's what I'd like to move forward on as governor. Would love to get your thoughts on that as an AR-15 owner and as a gun owner.
And I'm happy to share them with you, but not here because I said I would open the floor to questions. But I have a 22 conversion kit, so I use a completely different ammunition than what other, so. We will recognize Rotarians who may have questions. Please keep them brief. We have somebody with Darren, George, I see yours first.
So I have two. One about public school systems, right? I think that's great. One, where's the money going to come from? I mean, $4,000 per student is a lot. And there's I wasn't real sure, did you say you were for charter schools, but you're against vouchers? Is that correct? So then where's that money going to come from? And then the same way, you talked about a lot of great ideas, but again, where's all the funding going to come from? Like funding for police officers doesn't come from the state. There's a few things they may get from grants and things like that, but that's a local thing. How do you fund it all?
Yeah. So very quickly to answer part of that question about charter schools, I think fully public, not private and not for-profit charter schools should be part of the mix in public education. As originally envisioned by public school educators, these are going to be laboratories for innovation and ingenuity that would be shared across all public schools in the state or in America. But to show you that I put my money where my mouth is, all 3 of my kids go to traditional public schools in El Paso, Texas. We have a sophomore, a freshman, and a 6th grader who started the school year last Monday. I think that's where we have the greatest opportunity in traditional public schools to be able to improve outcomes in public education. Your big question, though, is Where are we going to get all the money for all these great ideas that we have? I mentioned that we have a $2 trillion GDP, $250 billion biannual budget. We do not lack for resources in this state. It's just a matter of prioritizing them right now. Today, your governor, our governor, is spending about $5 billion on Operation Lone Star at the border. I would argue it is more stunt than solution. For a fraction of that cost, we could come up with policy changes that both secure that border and allow us to have an operational immigration system that matches our needs and values. Imagine directing that money towards a better, higher use. I talked about $10 billion a year that could come into this state of our own federal income taxes to expand access to healthcare, but it also has other benefits to our local economies, including depressing pressure on your property taxes. But there's also fairness in property taxes. So if Texans have paid 40% more in property taxes over the last 7 years since Greg Abbott took office, in Tarrant County, you're paying 70% more in property taxes than you did 7 years ago. Your appraisals on average this past year increased 50%. Hopefully you were sitting down when you opened those. But if the average homeowner and then renter who pays property taxes through his or her rent saw a 50% increase, Walmart in Tarrant County saw a 6% decrease. Corporations in Texas can hire the attorneys and the lobbyists to contest their appraisals, and they're paying a fraction of the total cost that they owe to all of us. Just as the way that we're paying the full freight, they should too. If we had fairness in property tax valuation in this state, that's another $4 to $6 billion that could come in. If we did another smart bipartisan thing, and that's legalizing cannabis in the state of Texas so that we don't put people behind bars for possession of a substance that's already legal in most of the rest of the country, we'd save $500 million on incarceration costs, pick up another $500 million in taxing the regulated, controlled sale of that substance. There are revenues and resources, including a rainy day fund that is measured in the billions, a state surplus, thanks to our great state senator, that is over $20 billion today. We have the resources. We just have to check our priorities here in this state and make sure that our kids, which are the single greatest priority and the best long-term investment, get that money into those schools, into their lives. They do better. All of us will be doing better as a result. Thanks for the question. Appreciate that.
I am sorry that we're going to have to cut it off there. It is 1:01 already. We are so grateful that you took the time to come here. Your staff was excellent to work with. I will let you know that none of the questions were shared with his staff before he came. If Governor Abbott agrees to come see us, we will do the same thing, and hopefully he will not give us any restrictions on what questions we can ask. But thank you very much, and President Sean will turn it back over to you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, JR. Please stay. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It is a tradition of the Rotary Club of Fort Worth to donate a book in the honor of each speaker, and a copy of that book plate is framed as a memento for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President
It's a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Yeah, very good to you.
Sure. I believe you're going to be able to stick around. Is that correct?
That's my boss, yes.
Yes. So for all of you that have questions or want photo ops, we're delighted that you're able to stick around a little bit longer. Thank you again for our sponsor, Pastors for Texas Children. Pastors and faith leaders of all denominations are joining Pastors for Texas Children to support the quality education of all Texas children. The purpose, again, is to spark a strong grassroots movement committed to standing up for our children, families, and Texas communities. I will keep it brief. Remember to keep the program sponsorships coming. It's dues renewal time. Please respond to the member survey when that call comes in. And finally, in the Did You Know category, August is National Civility Month. Let's remember, we need each other. It's a perfect opportunity to share kindness and expand our circle of influence for the better. Go out and do a random act of kindness. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.